What is up, everybody, and welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com for another edition of our daily drop podcast series. I'm Jacob Turner. Joining me, as he always does, it's our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And AJ, we're here to have a conversation, a conversation we've hinted at since the end of Three Things after the James Madison game on Saturday. We also did another drop in which we hit on more about what, happened after the game in the locker room with Mack Brown and some of those reports. We hinted at it heavily in that drop as well. And this is the one where we're here to dive into it a little bit deeper. And before I kick it to you, I'll preface the conversation by saying that there's a lot of, pent up frustration in the Kenan Football Center. I think it's safe to say. A lot of which is centered and coming from the head football coach in Mack Brown. And a lot of it deals with off the field stuff that he in particular and the program has to deal with on a weekly basis. And again, we've had off the record conversations before we hopped on here and did this podcast. And some of it's absolutely fascinating to hear about. Some of it's also not necessarily a surprise for someone who's been in the media for 6 years and someone who I know has been doing it as long as you have. Some of it is. But I think it's a conversation in which we need to have, and I think it's an appropriate time. And AJ, one more thing before I kick it to you. Let me preface it by also saying this conversation does not excuse what happened against JMU on Saturday. It was inexcusable. I don't care what goes on off the field or what handbrakes you may have. You shouldn't give up 70 points at home to JMU and lose in the fashion that Carolina did. I have to say that because I know that's what fans are thinking. Oh, you're just making excuses now. We're not excusing that performance. Not at all. And Mack Brown essentially said the same thing. There was no excuses for it, and there still isn't. So I'm going to kick it to you, AJ. Talk to me a little bit about, again, very, very, very well-sourced information that you've received on some of the disadvantages and things that are going on behind the scenes that are having to be dealt with.
I like to call them obstacles.
Yeah, it's a good word. Good word.
Tug of war goes on a lot in the Kenan Football Center. It's kind of ironic that last Thursday I had an opportunity to have sort of an open hair discussion off the record kind of thing, just to get some information about where things are. And it was very interesting to me, a lot of the things that either I learned or that was reinforced that I've already known before, and the degree of the tug of war that goes on about a lot of things that people never think about when they're watching the game, any game, whether, and again, this is not an excuse for yesterday at all, any game that Tar Heels play. They're not thinking about a lot of the things coaches must deal with that don't usually show up even in press conference conversations. And I will say this, that the level of frustration has been growing for a while. And if people understand some of the obstacles that Mack Brown has to deal with on a regular basis at University of North Carolina, perhaps they might have a little bit of a different take. I think yesterday was so bad, it's going to be hard to get anybody on that island right now. But they would have been on there Friday if I would have come out and said, hey, here's some stuff I've learned this week. Mack is a guy who fights for every nook and cranny he can get for his program. And he came from a place where he didn't have to fight hard. Everything he asked for was there. But when you look at the range of things that he must fight for that were afterthoughts at Texas, from medical information to donor money, to trying to find ways to add to the NIL pot when people want to donate to golf, to an administration that views football players the way they view the rest of the students, to a scenario where there's a lot of belief among people in power at North Carolina that maybe football isn't worth investing what is necessary to contend for a national championship because it's never going to happen here because it never has. Those are significant obstacles, and those show up more now than they did when Mack first got hired in part two. Remember, in December of 2018, or I guess late November 2018, NIL wasn't a thing. The portal, as we know it, wasn't a thing. Mac was able to bring in a lot of talent. He had an immediate impact. The second year, they go to the Orange Bowl. But then there was a drop-off year, which they learned a lot. And then there have been 2 pretty good years. Historically, when you look at North Carolina football, 2022 and 2023 are good years, period. All right? Opening up 3-0 this year, should have been 4-0. There's no excuse, whether it was 70 points or if they would have lost 21-20. No excuse to lose James Madison. The obstacles I'm talking about, I don't think affect a game like that.
No.
JMU's got more obstacles, more inherent obstacles. Yeah. However, it's the program itself. It's the layering within the football center itself, the roster that Mac builds, the coaches that he hires. Hey, maybe this guy didn't come here because we can't pay him as much as school X can. Mm-hmm. Maybe this quarterback in the portal reached out to North Carolina as soon as he hit the portal because he saw what Sam and Drake did and thinks that's the place to go. And there's interest in going to UNC, but UNC could only offer so much money. Other schools can offer more. He goes somewhere else. Maybe it's retaining your own guys. Like they spent most of their NIL money retaining their own guys. There wasn't a lot for the portal. You've got a ton of millionaire boosters at North Carolina, people who had no problem paying for a $75 million locker room when Max showed up 6 years ago. But they don't want to put money into this because it's like throwing good money after bad money after good, or good money after bad, rather, however that term is. There is a culture issue among a lot of people that don't believe UNC football can do what they want it to do and what they expect it to do when they get emotional and a few drinks in them on Saturday, but it hasn't done it before. Basketball's always rewarded people's passion. They've rewarded their donations, their generosity, their participation in the program. Football hasn't done that. So it's wild to me how when we report, we cover football 12 months out of the year. And the content we roll from mid-January on up to mid-August, not great traffic. Mm-hmm. Some people are passionate and they want to talk more about left guard, backup left guard, that kind of thing. But suddenly when the games start, all these loud, upset people show up and they start screaming and yelling about stuff. And they weren't paying attention to the stuff we told them those other 8 months. They miss out on some things that they probably should know. And a lot of them don't know what we're talking about here in this podcast. So we'll continue to go on. But I do think it's really important to understand, because they help me understand just how many battles Mac has to fight on a daily basis. And I'm telling you guys, they are from every prong imaginable. Mm-hmm. And so if Mac were to walk away today or at the end of the season, whoever they bring in is going to have to deal with those same obstacles. And it's going to be harder for them because they're not Mac Brown. They don't have the credibility that he has. They're not going to have a dynamic staff with a former NFL head coach and a bunch of NFL coordinators on his staff like Mac does, because they won't attract those kind of people. So that group's going to be fighting with one arm tied behind their back and their legs crossed. Mac at least doesn't have his legs crossed because he's Mac, and he will fight for stuff. Mm-hmm. Past coaches haven't always fought back to get every inch they can get, and it ended up swallowing them whole. That's the deal. We're not making excuses. Mm-mm. I just think it's important that people understand that there's two sides to this story. North Carolina has been a double-digit favorite 8 times and lost under Mac Brown since he came back. 4 times they've been a double-digit favorite and lost by double-digit points. That's inexcusable.
Absolutely.
9-1, 9-5, 6-0, 8-4. It's inexcusable. Mm-hmm. 70 points to a team that thought they might change quarterbacks during the game. Mm-hmm. It's inexcusable. So there's 2 sides to this. That is a massive job because of all the stuff a head coach must deal with, where they're not getting the kind of help from the administration and the university that they should get in order to achieve what the administration, university, and fans think it should achieve.
Yeah.
Those ships have to be sailing in the same direction at the same time for this to work, and they're not.
That's it. What you just said is hammers at home the point we're trying to make of that there's an expectation within the fan base. There's an expectation for Mack Brown in a way with what he wants to come back and do. I mean, he said it since the very first minute he was on campus taking the job here in his 2.0 era. But again, you were talking off camera a little bit about the umbrella of all the sports. They still fall. They're part of the university. They're part of the university and everything that goes along with it. It's not like the football programs here and the university is way over there. They are tied together. They are under the same umbrella. So just like anything, AJ, I think the easiest way to kind of sum it is when maybe there's not it's the right word to use here, a desire from the top down. And I'm not talking about the top of Mack Brown. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the top of the administration, top of the university, to want to do what is necessary, maybe, to be as successful as they possibly can, to meet the expectations of the fans and what they want and what they have and what they desire. And they've so desired for as long as I can remember, at least. How, when there's the separation there, and when you learn about some of the things that are going behind the scenes, some of the handbrakes that this program and Mack and this staff has had to deal with from the minute he stepped back on campus in, late 2018, it becomes a lot clearer why a lot of these issues and why a lot of these things are still persisting. Because one of the things that I always go back to, AJ, is the issue with Carolina football. Let's use the mediocrity, particularly on defense. I always harp on the defense so much because I've never seen an elite defense besides maybe Butch Davis era, and we all know what happened after that. The different coaches have come in, countless defensive coordinators come in, countless different staff, countless different players are come in. But the culture's never really changed. The success of the program has never really changed. You know what I mean? Everybody who's come in here has struggled. So when you peel the onion back a little bit, and what I always try to tell fans is this issue with Carolina football is not just a Mack Brown 2.0 era, because all the people on Twitter now just fire everybody, get rid of everybody, start it over, hire this guy, hire that guy. They'll come in and fix the problem. But I always tell people, and I always tell people to look at it, and I think it makes so much more sense when you understand some of the things that are having to be dealt with that are unbelievable behind the scenes of. There is no proof in the last 30 years that change, clearing house and bringing somebody else in is going to fix anything. It's actually the exact opposite, really.
I think right now, because of because Mack's there. But go ahead, finish.
Last thing I'll say on it is there's no proof there that would change anything. It's actually the exact opposite proof. But again, when we're having the conversation that we're having right now, trying to shed some light on these things that don't see the light of day, you kind of sit here and say, oh, okay, this may never be fixed until this is fixed, until this changes. And I think that's the point of this conversation here and what we're trying to articulate and tell people without actually coming out and being like this, that, and this, and that, and they're happening all the time.
Yeah, you use the word desire, and I think desire is there, but often in life, and I will say this 1,000%, this is the case at North Carolina, the desire doesn't meet the commitment, and therefore never satisfies the expectation. That's the biggest problem at North Carolina. And if it's a problem for Mack, and Mack has scratched and clawed to get a lot of stuff, but still isn't getting what he needs. If that's a problem for Mack, it's going to be a problem for the next guy and a bigger problem. Mack's got a lot of millionaire boosters in his back pocket, and he's still battling some of these things. The next guy's not going to have those boosters. The next guy is not going to have the same clout. I mean, Carolina was almost on its knees begging Mack to come back because everything had fallen completely apart at the end of Larry. And Larry did a lot of nice things. And I did that drop last week where 13 of the 22 guys in the NFL for North Carolina were recruited out of high school by Larry. Larry did some good stuff, but it fell apart fast. and he had no ability to fix it because of some of his own limitations. I think he got overly stressed and just made bad decisions at times, but also got no support. None. I mean, they're bringing in a new field every week. His last year, Larry was hired December 2011. He was told about this indoor facility that was going to come. They practiced in it his last week, the week of the NC State game in 2018. I wrote a story when they were building the indoor facility that it took, like, I think Miami built one and they built it in less than half the time it took North Carolina to build theirs. I went and tracked all the ACC indoor facilities and how long it took all of them to get built. North Carolina took twice as long as almost every one of them, and was still significantly longer than the others. It's like they were in no hurry. Mm-hmm. They didn't hire a construction company that was in a hurry. Mm-hmm. It was like the Big Dig in Boston. It took 12 years. It never should have taken that long. They should have gotten that damn thing done in 9 months, 10 months. When I walk in there, sometimes I think, this took all that time? I mean, it's not like there's 6,000 pipes they had to lay.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is part of the problem that still exists at North Carolina.
It's it's a microcosm.
Look at the concourse at Kenan Stadium. Mm-hmm. A very good friend of mine I played football with in high school is a big-time booster at James Madison. He was at the game Saturday. And while he complimented Carolina fans, saying they were so nice and generous, he said, he thinks I'm North Carolina. He says, you have a beautiful stadium there. He says, but the concourse is terrible. It looks like it's not important. I'm talking to him. I left at 10:20 Saturday night.
Talking to him on the phone, yeah.
Because I'm dealing with the Mac story stuff that was coming out. I talked to him on the way home. Talked to him for a half hour on the way home on the phone. And he was telling me these things. He's like, I was here in 2011 or whenever it was. He missed the game when JMU was in Chapel Hill in 18 or 7 or 19 or whatever it was. He was last there in 2011. His daughter was a cheerleader at JMU. And that was around the time the Blue Zone came in. The Blue Zone was new, and he thought that was cool. But he says this thing hasn't changed in 13 years. He said Bridgeforth Stadium at JMU's had 4 facelifts since then. You have to look at the ground when you walk on the concourse at Kenan Stadium because it's cracked and hills everywhere. Otherwise, you're going to trip and fall and face plant.
And that, again, doesn't excuse what happened on the field yesterday.
No. But we're talking about something in addition to what happened on the field. Mm-hmm. And it's, you and I have talked about stadium stuff before. We've done this
all the time. I harp on it all the time.
But what the irony is, I texted, I was like, I'll fill you in on some stuff, and we're going to have to talk about this at some point next week. And this is before the game Saturday. This is on Friday. Mm-hmm. So they could have won 45-0 Saturday. It wouldn't matter. I'd still think that this would be an important thing to get out there.
Exactly.
And I think that's one of the reasons why the 3 sources whom I met with were willing to share some of this information.
Mm-hmm. And again, you're the reason you're bringing up the football thing, and we talked about this off the stadium thing, as we talked about this off the record, is that alone. I'll say this: I've been going to Carolina football games, season ticket. My dad's been season ticket owner for 15 plus years, so I've been going to Carolina games either covering games or as a fan for at least 15 years. Went to games before that too, and I've always talked to you about how they have to do something to the stadium because it looks the exact same to me, besides a little bit of things here, maybe some fresh paint there, maybe a new.
Well, the chairbacks are one addition that's changed
as well.
And it dropped the capacity by 12,000.
Yeah, and I'm more talking about the concourse kind of area. Yeah. And again, we're not harping on that, saying, well, if you improve the concourse, the team's going to just start winning national championships.
But it's an indicator, Jacob. It's an indicator of the full commitment to football or lack thereof.
Exactly.
The football facility took forever. Mm-hmm. The money hasn't been there. An approval for a new weight room was made 3 years ago. If you've seen the videos, and hunt them down if you haven't on Twitter or wherever, of UVA's new facilities, which are off the charts, Nebraska's. And look at the weight room, and they have these drones, I guess, and the drone just travels and travels and travels and travels, and it's a weight room. Mm-hmm. If that drone went into Carolina's weight room, and I see the weight room 3 times a week, it would go whoop, and then have to go on. It's not that big.
Yeah.
And there was an okay 3 years ago. Let's build a weight room like everybody else has, and move the locker room and do more there. You want to know what they added? Basketball court.
I know that's what they. Yeah.
So this is stuff that people in the program have been talking about. Well, it's coming for 3 years and it's not there.
Mm-hmm. And
the school needs to have, and I know it needs money.
Yeah.
But, and I know that there's a belief that North Carolina's rolling in cash and it's got the same money everybody else does. It does and it doesn't. Mm-hmm. It does in that it's got a ton of boosters who could pay for stuff because they paid for a lot of stuff before. And a lot of them are thinking, well, now I'm going to have to donate for a possible basketball arena, whatever. But it also doesn't, because why do you think those little special section seats were built in the stands for $6,000 a pop? That's $12,000 a game. That's 7 home games. It's $84,000. They're going to become a meme for $84,000 because they're nickel and diamond stuff right now. That's not even going to pay for an assistant nutritionist. And they have quite a few nutritionists. They do a great job with nutrition, by the way. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk to Amber at some point, and they do a great job with that. There's so many quality things they have in the program, but they're also limited. Like I said, Coach A calls and says, I'd like to be on your staff. Oh, you can't afford me, so I'm going to go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. I mean, that happens all the time.
And I think that's the separation and the example of, from a fan base perspective, wanting to compete here and wanting to be the best when that's really never happened here, besides a close kind of during Mack Brown's first tenure. He's always ever been getting close, really. But the separation exists of, this is what we want. But when you peel back the onion, I keep using that analogy, and you learn about things in the handbrakes that kind of limit maybe how successful this program can be from a top-down standpoint and desire standpoint. You kind of sit there and say, well, this expectation here isn't really a realistic expectation based on the current setting that this staff and this program is operating in. They don't correlate, because I use this a lot too, AJ. I think I've used this analogy or this example before. You're talking about competing at the highest level of college football. That is what Carolina fans want. But there are so many small marginal gains that you need to compete. You could be 5% worse than the team over here, and that means you're not competing against. You're not going to be able to compete, and you're going to lose, and you're not going to be able to compete at that level. So when you've got all these things going on behind the scenes that limit what you can do, that limit how much money maybe you can put in, that limit the things that you're having to deal with on a daily basis that other programs don't, you're automatically starting from here when other programs and other teams that don't have to deal with this stuff is starting up here. So bridging that gap is so much harder when we're not talking about Division III football, AJ. We're talking about the highest level of Division I football is the desire of Mac and the desire of the fans, and that's what they want. And when they don't get it, they get upset about it. And I understand that. I'm a fan of teams too. I get that. But it's not as simple as just Mack Brown's the problem. Get another coach, you bring him in. Because you know what's going to happen, AJ? They're going to come in. They're going to deal with the same obstacles that he's been dealing with. They're going to deal with the same obstacles that Larry Fedora dealt with. It's just what's going to happen. So I told you off the record, off camera, we're going to be having this same conversation in 5 years if nothing changes, because it's just going to be a rinse and repeat cycle no matter who comes in. That's how I look at the situation. That's what I've tried to explain to fans of. It's not just a Mack Brown 2.0 issue. I'm not excusing the JMU game. And if you think Mack Brown should be fired, that is your own opinion. You can have that opinion. I'm not going to tell you not to have it. But I guarantee you, I think the way you look at it would drastically change if maybe you understood a little bit more about some of the things that make it not as black and white as he's bad, he's a bad coach, they're a bad football team, get somebody else in. I'm telling you, it's not that simple. And I think that's what we're trying to articulate here. I think that's what we're trying to say.
Yeah, and you can think that you could say, well, I want the next guy to have to deal with these problems. You can understand this and still think Mac's not the guy.
Yeah, of course. I'm
The
not.
bottom line
I
is
get that.
they've lost a lot of games in which they've had more talent than. So
100%.
in those games, the obstacles were not factors.
Mhm.
They shouldn't have lost yesterday. Shouldn't have lost to Georgia Tech and Virginia last year.
Not excuse. There's no excuse for that. There's no excuse for that.
Look at it this way. I'm someone who's lost a lot of weight. All right. So I know what it takes. So let's say you're Joe Schmo and you got to lose 60 pounds. And your desire is, man, I want to lose 60 pounds. I want to fit into a size 38 or 36. And you're at a 46 or whatever. Okay. Man, I want to look like that. I want to be able to be proud of myself. I want to feel better. I want to sleep better. You've got a desire. But if you're not committed to doing it, that desire will never meet the expectation of being that person physically and with respect to health. If you have that desire, but you still eat junk food as opposed to eating the right stuff, which costs a little bit more money, it's more expensive to eat low carb and eat healthy than it is not to. You're never going to achieve that goal. You're never going to satisfy the mission. And you're still going to be 60 pounds overweight and still with a desire. And maybe you change your wardrobes or you change a job or you start changing some of your routines, but it's still the same because you still eat the Twix.
Mm-hmm.
You still eat the coffee cake for dessert. Mm-hmm. North Carolina has to lose some weight, and it's not eating the right stuff, so to speak. If you want to, that may be a crappy analogy, but I'm going to stick with it because that's a thing of control. Now, just because North Carolina, let's say it becomes fully committed in every conceivable way, if it's just as committed as Texas and Georgia, that doesn't mean it's going to win a national championship. But I guarantee you the teams will be better every year.
Yeah.
Look at the portal, what they brought in last year. Think about how little it cost to bring in those guys. That's something that people that complain on Twitter can control. If you're bitching about Mac should go and the defense stinks and all that, and you're not putting any money into the portal, into the collective, you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
You can't have expectation and then not doing it's fans. I think fans can be more critical of players now than ever before. I think media can too because they're getting paid. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the kids are getting paid more than a lot of the fans and people who cover them. So I think it's okay to be more critical now. The players want to be paid. Once that happened, open season, man. I get it. But if you want to play an active role and help your program, you can do that. Mm-hmm. So I think that would help the perception of the culture from within. If you're people who are higher up in the athletic department and the fans just aren't donating, you're not going to be as compelled to believe and put forth as well. Those two things have to meet. The crowd yesterday sucked. There was no reason for it to suck. You had a good opponent in there. Mm-hmm. Carolina was 3-0. There was no reason for it to be an embarrassment. Mm-hmm. As the great Taylor Zarzour used to say, you could throw a grenade into certain sections of that stadium. It could have gone off and no one would have gotten hurt.
Yeah.
The crowd for Central sucked. The crowd for Charlotte sucked. Mm-hmm. There's a big problem all the way around, but I think the biggest problem is the administration, the University of North Carolina, and all the rings of the power structure need to be more committed to football, whether it's Mac Brown, whether it's Larry Fedora, whether it's Joe Schmo. I've used Joe Schmo twice. I'll do Harry Schmo. How about that? Different guy. Whoever it is.
Yeah.
The next guy, if there is a next guy soon, is going to will inherit the very same problems and won't be armed with the weaponry, so to speak, that Mac is in dealing with them. So it's going to be an uphill climb.
Yeah, I want to say two more things before we wrap it up. This is why I want to leave it at. People talk all the time about culture and that the culture is wrong in the Carolina football program. The culture is the problem. But I think what we're trying to articulate here, and I think what people often don't understand is the culture of a football program doesn't start just in the Canaan Football Center, AJ. It starts from the top. It starts from the administration, a desire from within the university to want to be the best that they can possibly be at this specific sport. If you don't have that, you're never going to get there. You're just not. I don't care who you bring in. That's how
I think it can start in a football center in that there are a lot of schools that have great football cultures that make a bad hire and it doesn't work.
Yeah, that can happen too.
Yeah. LSU had 7 losing seasons in the 1990s. Look at Georgia before Kirby got hired. So I see what you're saying. I think what it is, you get a culture in the football. Let's say the Keenan Football Center has a great culture. I don't know if it's a great I think from a personal standpoint, it's got a phenomenal culture. From a football standpoint, I think it has a good culture, but too many of what happened Saturday happens for it to be a great culture.
Exactly.
A great culture would minimize that. And it wouldn't happen so often. So it doesn't yet have a great culture. However, if the Keenan Football Center had a great culture and it's growing and growing and it needs new space, so to speak, that umbrella of the university culture, it's going to run into that wall at some point.
Yeah.
And that's where things get affected. That's where the growing frustration. Mack Brown took this program to that wall. Now, they didn't do their part when they got to that point.
Exactly.
But they weren't going to get much help either.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that need to be fixed no matter who the head coach is, what we're saying. And to be very clear, if you think Mack should go, that's your prerogative. I think Saturday was a horrible look for Mack and that staff. It makes this discussion harder in a sense, simply because people are going to have a hard time looking past what they saw Saturday.
Exactly, yeah.
Friday, this would have been a much easier conversation to have so people would get the whole gist of what we're saying. But pre-70 points, post-70 points, that same problem exists exactly as it did. And right now, whatever goodwill Mack had with certain people in the university, it's not as strong now because that was a horrific look.
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of look that hangs around for a while. If they go to Duke and get beat, and Malik Murphy looks like, Cam Ward, man, this whole thing is going to be an inferno. And I get it.
No, I get it too.
I understand it. I'm related to people who want changes made. I get it. Right now, I don't view it that way. I've never been a proponent as a journalist of saying assistant coaches should be fired. I do think it is my responsibility when I think a head coach is done and should be moved on from. I say it. I did it when Larry lost at Duke in 2018. When I wrote the column, maybe you aren't so close, because Larry kept saying, we're close. And after the Duke game, I said, Coach, at what point when you're constantly close but don't get over the hump, at what point do you start to realize that maybe you aren't that close? And that set him off. And that resonated. That's what I wrote my column about. That was my way of saying he's done. I'm not ready to say that about Mack because I know the battles. I know the battles better now than I knew him when Larry was coach. But I do think crap like Saturday should never happen. It's inexcusable. It would be inexcusable for a first-year, 35-year-old head coach in his first game. It would be inexcusable for him. It sure as heck is inexcusable for a 73-year-old legend. With a very impressive coaching staff.
Agreed. It doesn't excuse the collapses the last couple of years. It doesn't excuse 2021. It doesn't excuse yesterday. That's not what I'm trying to say. And I know that's not what you're trying to say, because I know it's going to be misconstrued like that by people listening to this, who listen to 5 minutes and then turn it off and go on Twitter.
Hear what they want to hear.
And go on Twitter and say that we're defending Mack Brown. That is not essentially what we're doing here. We're trying to help shed some light and give a little bit more perspective of, it's not as black and white as a lot of people think it is. And I think that without coming on here because here's the problem. You can't come on here and tell people everything you know. You can't just be on here and be like, this is what's happening. This is what's happening. This is happening too. And I think if you could do that, I think the perception about the program and perception about what we're trying to say would be taken a lot better than maybe it will be. I'm prepared for that. But I hope by coming on here, people can understand the message of, it's not as black and white as you think it is. And it's not just a Mack Brown 2.0 issue. I promise you it's not. I'm not saying another coach might not come in here and do better. That could happen. But like you said, let's go look at the last 30 years, A, and B, the guy that comes in, I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's Urban Meyer or some Division III coach who you've never heard of before. They're going to deal with the exact same issues that guys, including Mack Brown, including Larry Fedora, including other people within this program who've been in the last 30 years.
Funny you bring up Urban Meyer. This is an absolutely true story. I've never told this publicly before, and I'll say it right now.
PHI exclusive.
Yeah, PHI exclusive. A very, very good friend of mine in the media in 2004 contacted Urban Meyer. He has numbers galore. And Urban was at Utah at the time. Utah hammered Carolina out in Salt Lake City that year. In fact, they set a record for most yards in the game up to that point against the Tar Heels. And it looked like John Bunting was on his way out. This was pre-Connor Barth 42-yard field goal to beat Miami, which changed everything. He contacted Urban and said, would you be interested in the North Carolina job? Because it looks like it's going to come open. Urban told him, why would I be interested in that job? They don't want to win. Now, it's 2004, and I think we've seen signs of commitment. They did build some things at the football center. Mack got a lot of the renovation work that he wanted when he got in there. It's not like Mack has had his hand out there. And
no.
We'll coach for donations. We'll coach for a bigger weight room, that kind of thing, like guys at a median strip. But it hasn't been enough. You look around the ACC, there are some schools that just do more. And I'm not talking even Florida State and Clemson, Miami. There are schools that do more. Louisville provides a lot more support. I don't want to start naming schools. I don't want to steer people in that direction. I know there are schools that do more. There are schools that have programs have a better relationship with the university as a whole because they're more on the same page. So maybe I shouldn't have told the Urban Meyer story. Who knows? But it's long ago enough. It's 20 years. So statute of limitations have run out on that one.
I think it's a great story, and I've heard it from you before, and I think it articulates and kind of sums up some of the things that I think we're trying to say here of, again, the culture, and again, the want to from a university and from a standpoint of wanting to be the best and wanting to win, like maybe they do in other sports, and we see it on a consistent basis. I mean, Carolina is historically a very successful athletic program, but the two programs that have struggled the most are what, AJ? Football and softball?
Yeah.
Is there a reason for that? Particularly on the football side? I think so, and I think that's what we're trying to say here. It's not as simple as it's just Carolina can never hire the right head coach, and they never recruit the right players and hire the right coordinators. I think it's a lot more believable to think there's probably some other things going on than Carolina's just 0 for 250 when it comes to hiring coaches and assistants and coordinators. I think it's a lot easier to believe that than be like, wow, they just really just strike out every time they try to hire somebody.
It's hard to be a major national player on a consistent basis, especially if you're not Michigan, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Southern Cal, Alabama, all those schools.
Georgia.
Georgia, a lot of those SEC schools have always been fully supported. They have their flare-ups, like Tennessee. Tennessee was bad for a while. Now Tennessee is a big deal. But some of those schools always have it. LSU always have it, always has it. Look at Oregon. Oregon didn't have that. Oregon had some flare-ups out in the Pac-12. They had Warren Moon back in the 70s. I'm going back to the 70s to find something.
Yeah.
And they were okay in the 90s. Wake Forest beat them in, I believe it was Bill Dooley's last game as head coach, beat them in the Independence Bowl, beat Oregon. Oregon was thrilled to be in the Independence Bowl and play Wake Forest that year. Oregon didn't have the same branding that North Carolina has. Oregon didn't have, I'm talking pre-Oregon flare-up now, Oregon didn't have the fan base. It didn't have the eyeballs. When Carolina played Oregon in the Final Four 4 years ago, people were like, Oregon? Because they had it in football, but everything else they didn't have that. North Carolina resonates in pretty much everything because it's like Texas and Michigan and UCLA. It's one of those big name schools.
Yeah.
But Oregon became awfully committed to winning football. And a lot of that's because they had the money behind Phil Knight and Nike.
Of course.
And the commitment. You look at their facilities. I've not been there in person, but I've watched videos. It's off the charts.
It's unreal.
The program gets every bit of support it needs. And that's why Oregon, an afterthought for 100 years, is now a major player on the national scene, has been for a long time. It has been for the last 15, 20 years. Played in the national championship game, Cam Newton game. So If Oregon can do that, North Carolina can. But the commitment has to be there. And it's not.
Yeah. And I think that's how we wrap it up, because I think that's what we've been essentially articulating for the last 30 minutes we've been on, however long we've been on this podcast. That alone, I think that puts the final, you hit the hammer on the nail. I think that hammers that nail in and it's in. I think that's the point we're trying to make here. And again, I'll say this for the 5,000th time on this podcast, because I just know this is what's going to get misconstrued, AJ. We are not defending the losses. We are not defending JMU. We are not defending the collapses the last couple of years by any means necessary. That should have never happened, handbrake or not. I don't care. It just shouldn't have. And I think people who I think Mack Brown understands that to an extent too. But like I've said, it's not as simple as just get rid of everybody and bring something. It might work. But I think if you understand the history of Carolina football, and I think if you've been watching Carolina football for a long time, I think you should be able to understand that, oh yeah, maybe it isn't as simple as that, because history literally shows you it's not. And when you understand some of the things that you understand, talking to some of the sources you've talked to, it starts to make even more sense of, oh yeah, I get it now. I get it now. I'm not really surprised at where maybe this program has been and where the culture of this program has been the last 30 years. I always go back to that 97 year, because I think that's the closest they've gotten, and haven't really, besides maybe a flare up here and there and a Butch Davis era that we, doesn't even count anymore, really. They haven't really been close. So we'll see. I mean, who knows what happens? I think it's fascinating, though, from a journalistic perspective, to cover a team and understand these things that are going on, because you have to understand a lot of these things to be able to really maybe understand the struggles of why this program is a frustrated fans for so long, because that's what it has. It's what it's done, AJ. It is frustration from Carolina fans when it comes to the football program, when it's the exact opposite for something like a basketball, let's say. And we know why, because they've been rewarded and they haven't been in football. So again,
100%. We'll see.
We could talk for another hour, and I think you're probably biting your tongue over there a little bit about some things you'd really like to be able to say, because it would make so much more sense. But
I would, but I think I've divulged a lot more than maybe even I would have last week because of the circumstances, and I think people have a right to know. And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I think that's. I don't
want to go any further, because I will step in it if I do.
Yeah, I think that's all that needs to be said, and we appreciate you guys for watching. Again, I hope this sheds some light on maybe some of the frustrations and reasons that maybe people are frustrated with the program. And I hope it gives a little bit better understanding. And again, without us being able to say, but so much helps give some understanding of it maybe just not being as black and white as a lot of people think it is, because it just really isn't. So we'll see what happens the rest of the season, AJ, and we'll continue to cover this team and cover this program no matter who the head coach is. And again, it's going to be a fascinating season to cover, particularly after that loss to JMU. So I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones, another edition of our daily drop, one of our longest daily drops. Might as well just call this a THI podcast at this point.
Yeah.
Maybe we will. Who knows?
Maybe we will. Maybe, because you got to edit it, and if you want, they give you carte blanche to do with it what you want.
Yeah.
We had to do this one, and we'll see. We got Mac Monday. We're recording this on Sunday
afternoon. Yeah.
So it's going to run Monday morning when we have one that we went yesterday. It'll be interesting. Got Mac tomorrow morning, or Mac this morning, I guess, is running the Monday.
Yeah. So
very, very interesting. Look forward to all of our reports. And guys, I put a lot of stuff on Twitter at the press conferences, because we not just get Mac, we get Jeff Collins. We're going to have a lot of questions for him, and Chip Lindsey. And on the board, I put a ton of stuff on there from it.
Yeah, 100%. The boards are where to be, especially for stuff like this. Maybe you can divulge a little bit more.
Yeah, you know a lot about Kamen Rucker and his injury situation if you were on the board.
Yeah, exactly. $833 a month. Links in the description below. Shoot us a Venmo if you want to support too. Just a way of saying thanks for the content we put out. That's at Tar Heel Illustrated. Links in the description as well, in the description below. We appreciate it, guys, as always. And we'll see y'all next time. Thanks.